High housing costs are driving people out of Maryland, according to a new report from State Controller Brooke Learman. The Controller's 78-page report on housing and the economy tracks the increasing outmigration. She says that younger Marylanders are leaving because of housing costs. Jackie, you've navigated the Montgomery County real estate market, but are housing costs driving people to greener pastures elsewhere?
Absolutely. And I don't think it's just even housing. One of the reasons I bought my house when I did is my rent got so high, it was the same price as a mortgage. So at that point, I was like, might as well build some equity. But it's so expensive to live here, particularly Montgomery County and PG County, the areas surrounding DC, that in a time where a lot of people are still able to work remotely, they're going and they're moving south, or they're moving to Delaware or Pennsylvania, somewhere where they can actually afford to live. Even if you're able to afford a mortgage, sometimes it means you're sacrificing things like buying groceries or paying for medication. So young people, especially, where they're also trying to pay back their student loans and they have other expenses going on, or they want to start a family, it doesn't fiscally make sense for them to stay here, unfortunately. And we're driving out a lot of people who could really contribute to the Maryland economy.
Mike, the controller's report says, quote unquote, regulatory barriers in the state are the cost driver, but doesn't get real specific with details. What are they? And can we be more specific, or is it just too hard politically to get into those details?
I think to some degree it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if you're taking a statewide approach, it's difficult to kind of delve into specificity. But if you look at a place like Montgomery County, our zoning and land use planning is just it's a very challenging process. And so it takes a lot, and they've made it that way by design, right? We live in a community that typically wants to slow growth down, or has historically wanted to slow growth down. And so we have policies and procedures that make it a very cumbersome process, and it is very onerous, from getting the approvals, the site plan approvals, to ultimately getting through and getting your permitting. And so I assume, not knowing each of the jurisdictions intimately, that you have variations on that theme that go throughout the state. And so the challenge is that we have to figure out how to overcome that. But I think that's where the governor ran into real problems this past year, trying to focus on affordable housing statewide. Each of the jurisdictions basically pushed back and said, well, no, we have our own special requirements and you can't usurp those. And I think that just points to the problem, because you can't take a blanket approach and say, we as a state are going to try to address this. You now got to go kind of cajole each of the jurisdictions, which then becomes the purview of each of those local legislators. And now you're down in a morass and just becomes one more way to make it more difficult to get housing built.
Jackie, what can we do to make housing more affordable in the county, and for that matter in the state as well? Are there some general things that we could do?
Absolutely. I think the answer to both of those questions is the same, and that's take government out of it. The law of supply and demand tends to work really well. And when you try to force affordable housing, what you get are, property owners who are they're trying to find loopholes around all these owners' burdens on them, and that are basically, forcing affordable housing there is making them not want to. If they're saying, oh, I have to rent cap here, like, okay, well, we're not going to do as much to maintain the property. So you're really not doing yourself any favors there. I think if you allow the law of supply and demand to work and the invisible hand to work, you're going to see these things balance out. You're going to see housing come down. And I think this is one of those times that small government really is the solution.
Mike, I'll let you get the last word. What can we do? You've talked about the difference between the county and the state, so let's just focus on the county. What could we do in Montgomery County to make things more
So in
affordable?
Montgomery County, we have to, as is always the case, and I usually say on this show, we try to set these things up as binary choices. And the reality is it's not growth versus no growth. We've done a really good job of planning in Montgomery County, and we have to sit down as a community and say, where is housing going to occur, and allow for that to happen. We don't have that conversation because nobody really wants to talk about it. So we have to establish, from a leadership perspective. I mean, last year the planning board made recommendations, but the county executive didn't want to do anything. So as a result, he just excoriated the planning board and said it was stupid and we shouldn't do anything. As a result, and with the caps on rent control in place that we have, you now effectively see no new housing permits in Montgomery County. So we have no housing being built. So we have to establish a set of policies that have a clear guideline of where to get to, where people can build, and to make it easy for them to build in those areas. If you look at Northern Virginia, I think their planning process is kind of crazy and their traffic is horrible, but you can see economic growth and you can see things being built all over. So it's not that you build or not build. I think there's a way to do it and do it with a good plan. And I think that we can do that here. One of the other pieces I think we need to address, and I agree with Jackie, it's a supply and demand issue. It's not about housing affordability, therefore you cap the price of the house. It's increasing the level of supply so we can actually have more, which will then bring the prices down. The one other piece, though, I want to make mention of, and I've heard different reports on this, is 25 years ago, when new developments were being built, 25% of the housing going into that development was typically seen as starter housing. Today, that's 4%. And so builders are building bigger houses because they can make more money. And so while we want to increase supply, we also have to help govern a little bit about what that supply looks like so that we can get people who can afford the lower end of that market into that market. It can't just be $1.5 million houses because that's where the money is. And so we've got to kind of create that balance to increase that supply as well.